Genes and proteins, and what does this have to do with you? We're going to take a little biology class today. It'll be brief, don't go away. Come back so that you can begin to understand what vaccines for COVID-19 are based on, what they're going to look like, and why you shouldn't be afraid of them. So welcome back. I'm Dr. Oscar Hernandez, board certified internist and practicing pediatrician. So today we're going to have a COVID talk, but you may go back to the days of high school because we're going to talk about some biology stuff. I hate to do this to you. I don't like to do biology lessons. I like to talk about concepts, but you need to understand some of the concepts that are going on when it comes to COVID vaccinology. That's actually a term, vaccinology. So what we want to do is give you a little education because about 30% of the population says that if there were a COVID vaccine, they don't want it. They're afraid of it. We're going to talk a little bit about how these vaccines that are at the forefront of development, and there's over 130 vaccines that are in preclinical trials. That means that they're just kind of like on the drawing boards. People haven't been started to be tested on them. But there are about 30 vaccines that are being tested on people, and of those, there are 3 that are top candidates. And most of these vaccines that are top candidates are based on what is called mRNA 1273. Remember that, mRNA 1273. You're going to read about it, you're going to hear about it in the press. What does mRNA 1273? I'm going to explain that in a little more detail, but there are 2 things you need to understand when it comes to vaccines. Number 1, proteins. Number 2, genes. Many of the vaccines that we have on the market are protein-based. What does that mean? I'm going to do a little chalkboard stuff here for you. So here's the deal with protein-based vaccines. These are very common vaccines. We have a lot of them on the market. You've all seen them, and they include things like the polio shot and the flu shot and the hepatitis B shot. And if we take the human papillomavirus against cancer of the uterus, we're going to have a program about that coming up soon. Those are all protein vaccines. What are protein vaccines? Protein vaccines are very simple. You inject something called an antigen, AG, into the body. This is a protein that lives on the surface of some of these bugs. It's not the bug itself in most cases. Sometimes it's an attenuated, semi-killed version of the bug, whatever it is, whether it's a virus or whatever we're injecting you with. Anyway, it's got these proteins on the surface of these viruses or bacteria, and we're basically showing the body those proteins. The body says, this shouldn't be here. And so it develops antibodies, and it attacks the antigen. Once these antibodies are formed, we continue to have these antibodies for a certain period of time in memory. Then, if the real disease shows up, we have antibodies that are quickly manufactured to kill the disease. That is the concept of protein vaccines. But now, in the land of COVID, we have a new concept. We have a concept where we're injecting genes, not the bugs, but the genes that are the genetic material of the bugs into a person. That doesn't sound so good, right? Well, there's 2 ways of injecting the genes. We can inject the genes as DNA, or we can inject the genes as RNA. Messenger RNA in particular, mRNA. Now, here's the way a cell usually works. This is a cell, this is the nucleus. This is where the high school biology lesson comes in even stronger already. And in the nucleus, you may remember that we have DNA. And this DNA, as part of the normal cycle of a cell, will open up. It is read, its codes are read, and they are read and turned into something called mRNA, messenger ribonucleic acid. These things go to another apparatus in the cell called the ribosomes, and they make proteins. And the cell needs proteins to live. And the body needs certain proteins to live, right? So, for example, take hemoglobin. What makes hemoglobin in the red blood cells that can carry oxygen? Well, it's got to be made somewhere, right? Well, it's made by the red blood cells. Where do they get the information to make it? From the DNA. All right, so there is a new series of vaccines against SARS-CoV-2, which remember, this is the virus that causes COVID-19. And what we do is we tell ourselves, this sounds very tricky, we tell ourselves, hey, I'll tell you what, we're going to give you some messenger RNA. It's going to go and be taken up by your cells. It's going to go to the ribosomes, and you're now going to make the antigen that SARS-CoV-19 is going to present to you should you get the illness. So instead of injecting you with antigen, we're going to tell your cells, we're going to give it the information that the infection would to make the proteins that are specifically spike proteins. These are the proteins that are used by COVID-19 to bind other cells and infect them. Well, you're going to make spike protein. Now, you're not going to make the virus COVID-19. It can't reproduce. It can't infect you. We're just going to show you, Mr. Cell, how to make these S proteins. And when we do that, your body is then going to do what? Produce antibodies. In case the deadly bug shows up, we've already got antibodies to hit it. Now, there's two ways of doing this. We can either give you mRNA that goes directly to the ribosomes, or we can give you the DNA of the SARS-CoV-19 that then goes into the nucleus, is read, it becomes mRNA, and goes to the ribosomes. These vaccines with mRNA, at this time, these things could change, are the preferred vaccines. These are the ones at the forefront. And there are three particular companies that are on the forefront of making this type of vaccine. And you may have heard of them. Moderna, whose millions and millions of initial vaccine productions have already been bought up by our federal government to give to the people of the United States of America. Pfizer and AstraZeneca. The federal government has dibs on their production. Now you might say, well, that's terrible. Only the United States gets this vaccine and it's a worldwide problem. Well, here's the answer to that. These companies, Pfizer, Moderna, AstraZeneca, will then hopefully take the product and license it to other countries and other laboratories. Where? Well, the powerhouses that make vaccines in this world. Who are they? China, India, Brazil, the United Kingdom, the United States. So the idea is that there will not be just one source of these vaccines, but a large source of these vaccines. By the way, these vaccines are not going to be completely powerful in stopping COVID-19. We expect that the FDA is going to approve vaccines that have at least a 50% effective rate. That means that we are producing antibodies and T cells that elicit something called natural killer cells. I didn't explain that part. But we want vaccines that at least in 50% of the people will produce these antigenic proteins that then the body will recognize should the real bad guy show up, right? And so how effective do they have to be? According to the FDA, they will approve vaccines that are at least 50% effective. The truth is, we believe that these vaccines will be 70 to 80% effective. And the trials we are having really show that in the groups that are being seen and published, they're 100% effective. Everybody gets antibody production. But more than that, not only do they all get antibody production, even old people get antibody production. They're getting within one, it's usually going to be done as a 2-shot series. You get one shot, 28 days, 30 days later, you got another shot. Once you have these 2 shots, everybody has antibody, but it gets better because the studies we have, pretty much everybody got antibodies after the first shot. Well, so why do we need a second shot? Well, here's the thing. We think that with time, the antibody response that these vaccines deliver is going to wane. It's going to go down. But if you give somebody 2 shots a couple of days separated, 28 days apart, the memory of the body to make these antibodies is going to be higher. Now, how do these DNA and mRNA get into the cell? Well, that's the trickier part. And I'm not going to get into all the weeds. But here's the deal. And we'll finish with this, I promise. Biology lesson is going to be over. If we're going to give mRNA or DNA by injection to a person, this stuff has to get back into our old friend, the cell. That's the nucleus, that's the cytoplasm, And that's the cell membrane. I don't know how much of this stuff you guys remember, but there it is. All tissues of the body have these components. These guys have to get into the cell. How do we get them into the cell? Well, essentially, we're infecting the cell. How do we do that? We load this junk up on another virus. Oh, now we're really getting creepy. You mean you're going to give me a virus to help kill another virus? Doesn't sound right, Doc. Well, here's the thing. The viruses that are being studied and used for this, and they're already being used in clinical trials, are things like adenovirus. Oh, well, this is the virus of the common cold. And almost everybody has antibodies to this, and the virus that's being used has been engineered so that it cannot replicate. All it can do is get into the body. Still too scary? Well, no problem. Here's what we'll do. Instead of mounting it on a virus, we're going to mount it on a lipid nanoparticle. This is basically a little piece of fat. And we inject the crud into the piece of fat. This is allegorical. I mean, this is a very complicated process. We inject the DNA or mRNA into the lipid particle, and the lipid particles get injected to you and they get spread into the body. One of the important things about giving these mRNA or even the DNA shots is not only are you eliciting our old friend antibodies, you're also eliciting what we call T cells. And the immune system has B cells that produce antibodies and T cells that produce what we call killer cells, and CD4 and CD8 cells. Killer cells are exactly what they sound like. They're meant to kill the enemy. So this is the type of protection you have. Which brings me to the most recent study that was published about this in the New England Journal of Medicine. I'm glad you asked. It was September 29 in NEJM, and it was phase 1 study. If you've heard these programs before, you know there are 3 phases of studies. Phase 1 studies and phase 2 studies are generally done on a very small number of people. We're looking first at safety. We don't want to kill anybody. That's phase 1. And in phase 2, we're mainly looking at efficacy. Okay, we know we can't kill anybody with this shot. Is it actually effective in fighting a disease? These are small numbers of people. These are 30, these are 40 people. And the Russian vaccine used these phase 1 and 2 studies to put up their vaccine all over the world. Now, in phase 3 and 4, we use thousands of patients, right? Because we want to make sure that these small numbers really do reflect what happens with this shot. Once we have these studies, and these studies are about to finish with this mRNA 1273 shot done by Pfizer, done by AstraZeneca. I have stock in AstraZeneca, by the way. Done in Pfizer, done in AstraZeneca, and done by Moderna. These are the 3 leaders at this time when it comes to vaccine development for COVID mRNA, and that's, of course, if you don't count the Sputnik vaccine that the Russians put out. Anyway, these companies are now about to finish phase 3 and 4 studies. They will be done by November. Now, politics aside, when the word got out that we might have a COVID vaccine by the end of the year, everybody made fun of you-know-who. Well, it turns out like we're probably going to have a vaccine. It may not be mass-produced by the end of the year. It may not be available to everybody in the United States by the end of the year, but it may be available to some people, especially first responders, physicians, other people in the front lines who really need to be immune to this, those who are at very high risk of deadly complications. Well, let's get back to our article in September 29 of the New England Journal of Medicine. Usually these studies have been done in rather healthy people because we don't want to run the risk of giving trouble to those who would really be badly affected by this vaccine. But this study was different because it was done in older adults. It's a small study, only about 40 people. Well, guess why? Because it's a phase 1 study, right? P1, phase 1. And here's what we saw. We saw 100% of these older people aged 56 to 71 years of age, 100% developed antibody after the first shot. And not just antibody, but neutralizing antibody. That means that this antibody was very effective at neutralizing, killing the SARS-CoV-2 virus. And that's only after 1 shot. And after the second shot, everybody still had neutralizing antibody. What were the side effects? Remember, this vaccine, 30% of people won't take it because it'll kill you. Let's look at the reality of things, okay? So let's take the hype and the politics out of this thing and see what the reality was. What happened to people? Let's see. They got a headache. Oh, boo-hoo. Take some Tylenol. They got muscle aches. Well, I don't want them. They'll go away. They got pain at the injection site. There were no severe side effects. There was no death. Nobody went crazy. Zombies didn't come out of this. This wasn't an apocalyptic vision. And by the way, there were no serious side effects of any kind. Nobody had a heart attack. Nobody got pneumonia. Nobody got a lung infection. Nobody got a coagulation storm like we see in patients with COVID who sometimes die in the hospital. None of that happened. Hey, here's the good news. We're making progress. In this very same room a number of months ago, one of the first videos that I produced was in a darkened room with a candelabra. And I kept lighting little candles. If you haven't seen it, it's still somewhere there in the repertoire of videos. Go down to the very bottom or the beginning of the videos. And I was lighting a little candle for every ray of hope that we had, because we had a rather hopeless situation. Even now, in Miami-Dade County, the epicenter in the southern United States of this virus, in phase 3 of reopening in the state of Florida, our case positivity rates are about 5%, a little under 5%, depends on the day that you look at it. In the state of Florida, that's also true. Folks, we're learning. We're learning to use our masks. We're learning to sanitize. We're learning to keep 6-foot distance. Is it perfect? No. I see things on the news that make me cringe, with people doing things that they shouldn't be doing. But overall, things are getting better. Even if we had a vaccine with a 50% effective rate, it's still useful. Why would we approve something with a 50% effective rate? Yeah, it doesn't work the other 50% of the time. Because it's good enough to stop a pandemic. And between that and masks and other developments that are going on, we have hope. From the very beginning, I've been telling you, we will get through this. We are getting through this. Is it normal yet? Not by a long shot, but it's getting better. Keep your hope up. Keep looking up. Keep your faith strong. Protect your families, your businesses, and keep moving forward. We have to open up. We can't just constantly be living in a cave and call it safe. There is a balance between freedom and safety, and everybody has to figure out what their own personal balance is. As for me, I'd rather have freedom than live in a cave. So we have to be smart about what we do. Take your precautions and move forward. If you like this video, give us a thumbs up, subscribe, send it to your friends, your family, your relatives. Thanks for listening.